Now the add menu is what shows up whenever we press Shift A in the 3D view. We get all of these different options here, which have more options nested under them for things we can add. But you can also get to that menu in any Blender window where on its header you see the word add. So if we click this same menu will show up. Menus might propagate differently depending on where they're located on the screen, but they will contain the same items here. So we can press Shift A in the 3D view to bring up our add menu, but we can also add objects directly down in our outliner window by pressing Shift A here. So say I wanted to add a monkey head, I could click it, and I can actually add items right there in the outliner. If we were to change this to, say, the node editor, which we'll be getting into this in the future, we also have this add menu here, and to access the node editor add menu, of course, we can just press Shift A. So I just wanted you to keep in mind that if a window type in Blender, and Blender has 17 different window types, indeed, everything you actually see on the screen is composed of one of these 17 different editor types here. And if one has an add menu, you'll be able to see it down here in the header, or if the header is positioned in the top of that particular editor type, you'll see it there. But if it has one, you can always press Shift A to bring up that add menu. So I'll click this and take us back to the 3D view. The other way we can summon the add menu in the 3D view is by double right clicking. And the point of that is whatever you add with that add menu will be created at the point of the 3D cursor. So the 3D cursor has been right in the center of the grid here. So the monkey head we added, which you can see his little ears sticking out there, was created there. But if we were to like right click over here and then press Shift A and add something, it would be added there. So the point of the double right click is just a super quick way to put something in the 3D view where you want it without having to first position the cursor, then call the menu. So we could like double right click over here, add a torus, double right click over here, add a cylinder, etc. So I could easily spend one or more videos going over each item type that we can add in this add menu in the main 3D view. But rather than do that right now, I'm just going to give you an extremely brief summary of what each of these type of items are that we can add. So I'm going to go ahead and tap A to select everything, press X to delete. Let's press Shift C, which will send our cursor to the center of the grid here. And let's press Shift A to add. These first set of items below this first line here, these are all basic primitive shapes. And then below this we have a grid, which basically a grid is nothing more than just a plane that's already been segmented a bunch of times for you. So if we were to press Tab to go into edit mode, we see that it has been subdivided a whole bunch of times. And of course, if I hadn't yet went into edit mode, say if we press Tab to go back into object mode, I could press Shift A and add another grid. And then before we do anything, I could double tap space, and this will let me, of course, change the settings to that grid, how many times I want to subdivide, how big should the grid be, etc. But I mean, it's basically just a plane that's been subdivided a bunch. A to select all that, and X to delete. Under this, we have the basic monkey head, which this is not really a primitive, this is a more complex shape. And of course, the point of having like a ridiculous shape like a monkey or a teapot or something like that in other 3D programs is to just have a more complex mesh to quickly do tests with. Under this, we have block wall, which is an extremely awesome add-on. The name of the developer escapes me right now, but it was a really cool add-on you can use to make, very castle-like items, which I've done a few videos on, but I don't think this add-on is under development anymore. But if we were to click that, we could add that, and it adds this kind of basic, very castle-y wall here. And so long as you don't go into edit mode or don't click on anything else, you can double tap space and you get a huge selection of options to change, and we can move this menu over and edit the way this wall looks, the thickness of the grout, the spaces in between the bricks, what kind of shape we want it to be, and all that. When you're using an item like this that has this many options, it's really better to, if we press T to bring up our tool shelf, click this little plus sign, and this will leave up our operator window, which is what is hidden under this little plus sign here. So press X to delete, and I'm going to go ahead and close up my operator window as well. And let's press Shift A again. And so under more, we have several different items that we can add. So we have surface, which these are NURBS curves. These are a type of 3D object that generates differently from the standard polygon planes and such that is typically used in these mesh items. For instance, we could add a NURBS torus here, press S to scale. And it looks kind of like a regular torus, only it's smooth and everything, even though it doesn't have a subsurface modifier on it. We haven't pressed W or anything. Until we press tab to go into edit mode, we see that the construction of this 3D item is much different. And then we have these points here. We can move and do standard kind of rotations and such too to edit those. I'll press tab to go back into object mode, X to delete, press Shift A. And so moving on, we have metaball. These are an extremely underrated, underused tool in Blender. These can do a lot of really cool things, especially in terms of animation. Just a very quick demonstration. I'll create a metaball here, press S to scale, press D to duplicate it. And notice that when I duplicate this ball, whenever it gets close to another metaball type object, it does this kind of like Terminator 2 liquid metal villain guy thing. And notice these are smooth also, but we don't even have the option to add modifiers, so these aren't using a subsurf or anything like that. We can make these smoother by decreasing this view value, and we can increase the render value even more, so whenever we go to render, it will render even nicer. So you could continue pressing D, duplicate those, S to scale. And all these movements can be animated, which is awesome. So say I were to press F, which inserts a keyframe and moves my timeline down a second. And then press S to scale, G to grab, move it over here, something, press F again. And then we press the back button. We can animate these really cool effects with these metaballs. So moving on, let's press A to select everything, X to delete all that. Let's press Shift A. Under this more options, we have speaker. And speakers are really cool. They allow you to place sound within your animations, which is awesome. So if I click to add that speaker there, there's my speaker. I could press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, move it like this. And notice over here in the object properties, under sound here, we can assign a sound file and control the volume and pitch and such to this speaker. So if I were to click open, then select some random royalty-free soundtrack, we can assign that sound file to our little speaker here. And now if we press play here, which we can hear the sound whenever the animation is playing. And pardon the rumble, this is coming through another speaker and not internally. The thing to keep in mind when using these speakers is that the volume, and the pitch, and the position of the sound will be relative to the position of the camera. So it would work kind of exactly like you would expect it to. So say that you had this speaker parented to some character's mouth or something, and you had his face real close up to the camera, it would be very loud. And then if the guy were to move far away from the camera, taking that speaker along with him because it was parented, the sound would move proportionally to the position in 3D space. So I'll press X to delete that. Let's press Shift A. Under here we have lattice. A lattice object allows us to more simply control a mesh object. Now I honestly never ever use these because it's just not part of my workflow, but there's that if you want to check that out at some point in the future. Let's press X to delete that. And then going down the line, we have two Sensei format specific objects that are really awesome. And I'm actually not going to cover either one of these at all today because directly preceding this video, we will be doing a video covering the draw mesh and draw skin objects, which are really, really cool. So that's it for the more items. Under curve, we can add curve items. These aren't things that will particularly render, but they are things that you will often use in conjunction with things you can render. And we also use these to help control modifiers as well as create animation paths and stuff like that, which we'll get into in the future. Here we have text option, and this allows us to add text in Blender. So if we click that, it will generate this default generic text here. And over in our object properties, we can immediately begin editing all this stuff. We can select fonts here. You can, click this folder icon, select a different font. And now since Blender 2.75, we can actually see thumbnails of these fonts. So if we were to click this button here, we can actually get a preview of what these fonts look like, which is awesome to have now in Blender. And so I have this set up to where this will automatically display my fonts, but if you need to navigate to that and you're on Windows, it's typically under C, and then Windows, and then fonts here will get you to that location. I'm going to press cancel here. Of course, you can just press tab to begin editing what the text says. So, hey there, we could change that, and then when we're done, we press tab to go back into object mode, or you can simply press this button in case you forget to change the text. You actually need to be in edit mode. It's kind of a nice little reminder there. Okay, moving on. I'm going to press X to delete that. Let's press Shift A again. And here we can add cameras. And by default, we have a single camera set up here in Blender. And you'll notice that is located over here in the outliner. Typically, we keep the camera graphic, that is the little thing that represents where the camera is in 3D space. We keep that hidden until we're actually going to be moving the camera or animating and stuff like that. And then, of course, we have the lamp option to add lamps, and there are several different lamp types. And most of these now work for both Blender Render and Cycles, which we'll get into all that. But here's where the different kind of lamps are you can add. And I'm not even going to attempt to get into this because we're going to have to cover this in a whole nother video. Here we have the option for groups. And groups are an extremely, extremely powerful tool in Blender using groups and group instances. And so we'll definitely be covering that and how to use those really quickly and efficiently to create incredible things that otherwise would be totally impossible for you to do. Real quickly, if I press Shift A and under Mesh add a cube, I can press D to duplicate this a bunch of times. If I wanted to create a group out of all these cubes, all I would do is press A to select them all. If there were other things visible in the scene, obviously I would just want to select the cubes though. And we can create a group in two ways. We can press Ctrl G. You can kind of think of it as a mnemonic device that anything that is green is a group. So that's one way, or if I press Ctrl Z to undo that, we can also press Shift A with our add menu, and under groups, simply select create group. If I were to double right click over here and under mesh add a monkey head, you'll see that a regular object is highlighted in orange, and then the group object is highlighted in green. Now with this special button here, this is automatically turned on by default. What this does, this allows us to select a group of objects as though they were one object. And so say you were making a gun or something, and so the gun was composed of a bunch of different objects like a handle, a barrel, a trigger, a sight, a cartridge, whatever. This allows you to very quickly just select any part of that gun, and the whole gun will be selected as though it were one object. And this allows you to move different groups around or transform them, scale them, rotate them, move them, do all kinds of different things to them really quickly. But if you ever want to be able to select individual items in that group, you can just turn this off and you can go back to selecting and changing individual parts of that group. So a lot more to get into about groups and group instances that you're going to love. You're really going to love what it's going to allow you to do. But for now, we will tap A and then X to delete everything. So I'll press Shift C to put my cursor back at the center of my grid, press Shift A. Now you'll notice something that wasn't there before when we hadn't created any groups yet, this option called instance. And the instance is related to groups. So this is what we call a group instance, which we'll get into that in the future. Under Armature, this is what we use to create bone rigs for our characters or things that require complex animation. Let's do a real quick example of that. So if I were to press Shift A, under Mesh, add a cube, I could tap W 3 times or so, press Tab to go into edit mode, select this top face here, and I'll just hit E to extrude, and bring that up, E to extrude, and just make a little kind of shape like this here. My 3D cursor is already at the origin point of this object, so that sets me up well to add an armature. So I could press Shift A, under Armature, add a single bone. And you see when I do that, we can't see it because it is inside of this object. So if I were to press Z, you can see it there. So what we want to do is turn on X-ray here under our object properties for this armature so we can actually see it inside the object. Then we could press tab to go into edit mode, select this top part of the bone, and press G to grab it, and middle mouse to constrain. And we could maybe just make 3 bones to control this overall mesh here. Hit E to extrude, middle mouse to constrain, E to extrude again. Press tab to go back into object mode. And now we have this simple armature composed of 3 bones here. To get this armature to be able to influence this little cube object thing we made, we need to parent the cube thing to the armature. So what we would do is just select the cube thing, then shift select the item we want to be the parent, which is this armature, and then press parent. And when we do that, we can now select any one of these bones, which, if you'll notice over here, when we parent in the builder menu, our bones are automatically changed from those what are called octahedral shapes, as you can see here, to stick. But you could switch that back if you wanted, but stick is just a really nice way to be able to handle these bones once you have them parented to the object. We could select one of these bones, press G to grab, and we are now using an armature. So there's obviously a lot more to get into with that, but just wanted you to get the basic idea of what an armature was. Notice too down here in our mode selection button here, when we parented the cube object to our new armature, we were automatically switched into pose mode. Pose mode is the mode you need to be in when you want to move your armature around. So let's go ahead and switch this back to object mode. And notice while we're in object mode, the armature can do no kind of bending or anything like that. That is for pose mode. Okay, so let's tap A, select everything, press X to delete. We are almost through this introduction to the add menu. So let's press Shift A again. Going down the line, we have force fields. And these are things like wind, magnetizing things. These are different kind of forces you can create for your animation. So whenever you add one of these things, you're only going to see their effects when you are actually playing your animation. And also, in addition to adding a force field, say a wind force field like this, we could rotate this, scale it, what have you. In addition to be able to witness the effects, you're going to have to actually play the animation. And then also, if I were to double right click over here and say add a cone shape, also we need to have physics properties set up on our objects, which we're not going to get into today, but I just want you to be aware of that basic workflow with force fields. Finally, if we press A to select everything, X to delete, and Shift A to bring up our add menu, we have empties. Empties are just very simple kind of graphical elements that are used to help represent points in 3D space to the user and to do different things. Sometimes we use them to guide particle effects, or sometimes we use them as a way to track animation and stuff like that. So if I were to just add these arrows here, and the main thing about the empty is that this is a graphical element to help us represent some point in 3D space, and this will not render. So if I were to press Alt and click my middle mouse button to zoom in on this empty here down in my camera view, notice it doesn't even show up, because in our camera view, our display mode is set to only render, which this means that our camera view down here is only showing us things you'll be able to see when you actually render, and empties aren't one of them. So just wanted you to be aware of what empties were. Please don't go off all cockeyed and crazy thinking that you're going to be able to fully utilize all of these items immediately. Really, most of these things will require one or more tutorial videos to really help you get a good grasp on what they are and how to use them. This is just so at the most basic level, you will be aware of the knowledge of their existence. So I hope towards that end, I have succeeded in giving you a basic introduction to the kind of things we can add